I am Richie, and I'm hopefully going to not do any more of these, because hopefully other people who are on the steps and otherwise are going to step up and share the information that they have. Tonight we're going to talk about, if my remote works. If not, we can...
You can do it, Richie. I can push the button.
It might be so cold.
Yeah.
So we're going to talk about the history of this place that we are on right now. And this is what it looked like 104 years ago. We'll learn about why the building looks different now, because they tore this building down and built this building on top of it. And I'll talk a little bit more about what they did. But 104 years ago, when you were sitting right where you are right now, you would have been right on those different steps that they had on that building. And 104 years ago, on this spot, as some of you may believe is going on right now, Idaho was the heart, this dead center of class war in the United States. There was a brutal and at that time violent struggle in between the haves and the have-nots, in between the 1% and the 99%. And it came to a head on this site in 1907, when this man was killed in Caldwell. This is Frank Steunenberg. Frank Steunenberg was the governor of Idaho from 1897 to 1901. And he was a printer. He was a union printer, and he was, during the time of his, up to until the time of his governorship, and when he campaigned for his governorship of the state of Idaho, he ran on a pro-labor, pro-union ticket. He is now, you can see his likeness just over there, and the statue that faces the Capitol building, that statue is the statue of Frank Steunenberg.
When was that put up?
That statue, I actually don't know the answer of when the statue was put up. I bet the plate that's on there probably would tell you. So you can check later on tonight. So I don't actually, well actually we do have a picture later on of what his house looked like in Caldwell in 1907. But what it looks like right now, that's not the same house, but that's the site where Governor Steunenberg entered a gate on December 30th, 1905, and when he opened his gate, a bomb exploded and it killed him on that site in Caldwell. This is what the bomb looked like. The top one is basically a reconstruction of the bomb after it was after the incident. That is a model of that is an actual model by the bomb maker of what the bomb was going to look like. So that's what it looked like before it exploded on the bottom. When Governor Steunenberg was blown up by a bomb, it was a huge deal. It was a worldwide news event. This is one of the headlines from the Denver Post on New Year's Eve morning, the day after he was blown up. Because of our screen, you probably can't read it, but one thing that's really important is within one day, the press and politicians and the public generally, here comes the beer bike thing. The beer thing.
We'll pause for him. It's a bike. Check it out. Watch it.
A million miles per gallon! Alcohol driven!
Native would be proud.
Wow.
Yeah, so everybody on there is pedaling.
Everybody has to pedal.
The press and politicians and many members of the general public were already pointing fingers of blame before the police had ever even really began their investigation, pointing fingers of blame at the labor unions. Revenge for activity of big strike suspected. You see even in the headline on the following day. And the main union they were pointing their fingers at was a union called the Western Federation of Miners, which was probably the most radical labor union. By radical I mean going to the very roots of the problem as opposed to putting patches over the problem, trying to restructure American society so that it was fair. The Western Federation of Miners were the main group that the press and politicians were pointing their fingers at. And by the way, so the documents that you see in the slide presentation, part of the reason why I'm giving this slide presentation, I've spent several years going through the original documents from this trial, which are available at the State Historical Library, and many of them have been preserved. Some of them have not. I'll tell you a little bit more about that later on if I think of it. And so you're seeing this, for instance, is an actual exhibit from the trial we're about to hear about during the most of this presentation. This is the basically the dues book and ritual book of the Western Federation of Miners. You can see security culture existed even back then. There was a password to get into their meetings, and people were excluded once their meetings began. And that was because they were having to plan things knowing that there were informants and extreme police and state scrutiny in what they were doing. And part of the reason why the finger was being pointed at the WFM was because the WFM didn't particularly like Steunenberg. We'll see why in not too long. But here's what the Western Federation of Miners had to say about the explosion in their next magazine. You can't see too well, but it says, a chap by the name of Steunenberg was blown up by a bomb at Caldwell, Idaho on December 30th. He was governor of that state some few years since and attained considerable of a reputation as the inventor of that revered American institution known as the bullpen, which we'll find out what that is in a couple slides. The bomb had been carelessly left, presumably by some Russian revolutionists, in the gateway leading to the Steunenberg habitation. Such carelessness should be frowned upon. The gate was completely wrecked. And it's not, it wouldn't be hard for us to imagine, here we are in Idaho sitting on the site where all this came to a head, how history could repeat itself. Imagine, if you will, that all of a sudden we found out in the news that there was anthrax discovered in the Capitol building, and it came to light that the target of that anthrax was former Governor Dirk Kempthorne. And the fingers might be pointed in any number of directions, but they could be pointed in specific directions. This was exactly what happened in 1907. Nobody knew who did that. The police hadn't been on the ground, but immediately the Western Federation of Miners was basically pointed as being the ones to blame. So that's the setting. That's the context that we're in 1905 at this point. This is still 1905 when Steunenberg, December 30th, 1905, when Steunenberg is blown up by a bomb in Caldwell. And we're going to take we're moving into chapter 2. We're going to go back a little bit, and we're going to keep going back to understand the more broader context and how this came to be what was, in many people's minds, definitely the most important and social and political event of the 20th century as far as the struggle between at least labor and capital, and maybe even the most important event in an even broader struggle. And an important piece of that context is Bill Haywood. Bill Haywood at the time was the secretary, which is basically the highest, most authoritative position in the Western Federation of Miners. And Haywood is depending on your perspective of him, he's either a socialist or an anarchist. He's basically a socialist and an anarchist both, depending on the day of the week or depending on what the issue is. And he is legendary by this point. He is a legendary figure. Pretty much everybody in the country, definitely anybody who's a politician, knows about Big Bill Haywood. And this is a modern comic, or not necessarily modern, I think this is from the 70s, a wobbly comic about Haywood's legend by the time of 1905 when Steunenberg is blown up. So, that's Haywood. We'll hear a lot about Haywood during this presentation. And we're going to go back even further to 1899 when the Western Federation of Miners have already begun to get a reputation as not only a radical but a militant labor union. And we're going to go to northern Idaho. And the Bunker Hill Mine, which is near Wardener, Idaho, not too far from Wallace, Idaho. And what happens in the Bunker Hill mine is the union, the Western Federation of Miners, is organizing and making demands of the Bunker Hill Mine Company that they work miners only 40 hours a week and 8 hours a day. It was a novel concept at that time that people would only have to work 40 hours a day and 8 hours a week. And it was also a novel concept at that time that children would not have to work to support a family. And so the miners, when their demands are not met, they hijack a train. They, of course, as miners, have plenty of access to dynamite, and they blow up the Bunker Hill mine. Now, interestingly, I'm not going to talk too more about it, but after the Bunker Hill mine is destroyed, the Bunker Hill mine is rebuilt until it's finally shut down, basically by the federal government in the 1970s, and millions upon millions, if not hundreds of millions of taxpayer dollars have been spent since then remediating that site and the environmental hazards that it created. But it was blown up by the miners in 1899 in northern Idaho. The man who planted the bomb and later admitted to planting the bomb on the Bunker Hill mine is a guy named, or at least who called himself, Harry Orchard. And that's what he looks like in the Boise Penitentiary, and we'll find out how he got there. He was not only the man who admitted to planting the bomb on the Bunker Hill mine, he also turns out to be the man who confesses to planting the bomb at Governor Steunenberg's gate in Canyon County, and shortly after December 30th, 1905, he's put in the Canyon County Jail. That's what it looks like today. I haven't been able to find a picture, actually, of what it looked like in 1905. So Harry Orchard plants the bomb in 1899 to blow up the Bunker Hill mine. He plants the bomb, confesses to planting the bomb in 1905 to blow up Steunenberg. Now, we're going to go back even further to not necessarily the beginning of this, but the beginning of what at that time was a violent war between labor and capitalism, between people and the 1%. And a important beginning to that is Haymarket in Chicago. What happened in Haymarket in 1886 was, again, workers are demanding, making demands against child labor for a reasonable and regular work week, and they strike in Chicago in 1886, and a number of anarchist leaders hold a rally at Haymarket Square in Chicago, which you can still go to, and they finally have placed a monument on that site. There used to be a monument to the police at that site, but now there's a monument to the workers at Haymarket Square. And during that rally, somebody throws a bomb, and out breaks the police melee that ensued. There were, I believe, one officer that was killed, one police officer that was killed, and 8 anarchists are arrested and put on trial for their lives in what would later be called by many, at least in our perspective now in history, one of the worst miscarriages of justice in American history. Those anarchists are convicted and condemned to death. One of them commits suicide in prison. Several of them are eventually pardoned, but 4 of them, I believe, are taken to the gallows and hanged. August Spies was one of those anarchists who was involved with Lucy Parsons, who some of you may have heard of before. And as he marched to the gallows, he said famous words that are still at the bottom of the Haymarket martyr's grave outside of Chicago, that the time will come when our silence will be more powerful than the voices that you strangle today. And this is the memorial that sits at the resting place in the Forest